turning now to the characters, I'm going to move into the character analysis because, firstly, I've been told numerous times that I talk too much, and secondly, I don't want to provide too many spoilers because people have commented before saying that I've spoiled the game, and I feel really guilty. So I'm going to focus only on the core characters of this game due to time and prominence, and I don't think I've managed to keep any of my Final Fantasy essays under an hour, which isn't helping their appeal, and I'm endeavouring to do now. So, in Final Fantasy VI, much of the Empire's conquest throughout the game hinges around their pursuit of summonable deities known as espers, and it's here that we see another trope in Final Fantasy emerge, which is that of an ancient and marginalised race which has become almost extinct due to the relentless push of Empire and modernity, much like Yuna and Riku, representing the marginalised Al-Bhed in Final Fantasy X, or Ares representing the extinct ancients in Final Fantasy VII, or indeed Garnet representing the long-forgotten summoners in Final Fantasy IX. Final Fantasy VI sees the first playable character to appear on stage, which is Terra, as the enigmatic heroine, bridging past with present and humanity with the supernatural. So, I've alluded to previously that Final Fantasy VI is an ensemble game, and as such it's quite hard to pin down a central character. Indeed, you ultimately get narrative depth and exploration out of whoever you choose to hold in your party most prominently, but suffice to say, many fans hinge the game around Terra or Locke or Celis, and sometimes even Edgar and Sabin. And on this note, it's prudent to note that the Final Fantasy VI logo comprises of Terra in her Magitech armour, and she is the one who ushers us into the world and the setting of Final Fantasy VI. So I can see how one might lean towards her centrality of this instalment, and furthermore her relationship between the two decisive races of humanity and Esper are a central plot point around which much of the game hinges. So, she does have a degree of significance to her. Now, we find her at the beginning of the game controlled by the Slave Crown. We are thrown into the action and the ambiguity of her situation, and her relationship to the Empire, with Biggs and Wedge providing an excellent opening dialogue which contextualises Terra as somewhat unearthly and unaligned to the interests of the Empire, were it not for her hypnotism. And shortly thereafter, her awakening at the hands of the Esper alludes to her affinity to these beings, and also her fragile and constantly threatened demeanour, which prevails throughout the majority of the Final Fantasy VI story. Her journey, I think, hinges around loneliness and the pursuit of meaning, which is captured brilliantly by her theme song, Nobuo Uematsu provided for this game. And in many ways, this plight of hers makes her the obligatory female enigma, such as Ares from 7 or Garnet from 9. As the game progresses, we find her interaction with Espers a tantalising precursor to her eventual reveal as a half Esper, half human. And returning to the theme of duality I mentioned earlier, Terra embodies this perfectly with her conflicting heritage and shifting physical appearances between her human self and her trance Esper form. Despite this mystical female stereotype she sits within, it's also prudent to note that Terra is an interesting break from the mould, in that she evolves to become a maternal rather than a romantic foil for a male counterpart. Her romantic impotence, which has its own subtle plot points in this game, breaks from not just Final Fantasy conventions, but the wider expectation of Western mythic, folk and fairy tale lore, which I really quite like. And on that, what I mean with that is, if we look at any, Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, they all hinge around a romantic conclusion, and I really like that Terra has broken from this mould as a central character. As soon as Locke rescues Terra and swears to protect her, I assumed it would go down this route of a conventional love story, but we see that Locke's offers of protection are symptomatic of his regrets, which I'll discuss shortly, and aren't unique to Terra as a person, or as a romantic foil for him. Terra also has much more affinity with fleeting secondary characters like General Leo, who assures her that she is capable of feeling emotions, later in the game, which is one of her personal crises which she has to tackle with throughout the events of this game. Ultimately, Terra develops to become a maternal rather than romantic figure, which is great. Her love for the children of Moblise
serve as her raison d'etre at the end of the game, and the love story is reserved for, Locke and Celis, despite all initial indications. Finally, just looking at the slightly amusing etymology and reasoning behind Terra's name, which I think I've touched upon. She was originally slated to be called Terra Branford in the western port of the game, which for an English-speaking audience doesn't sound very mystical at all. But thanks to the controversial translator Ted Woolsey, who is, somewhat controversial for taking liberties with his source material, he pushed for the translation of her name to be Terra, which is Latin for earth, and has a much more mystical vibe to it to an English-speaking audience.